I find the story of the Ocoee Massacre somewhat parallel to what we experienced here in Springfield more than 100 years ago, the race riot of 1908,
Mhm.
and just how there was this very high profile racial outburst that led to, tragic deaths. And then the community was sort of not ready to sort of face that reality and face its history years down the road. Eventually, Springfield has done that. There's a 1908 race riot walking tour, and there's been some sculptures built near the presidential museum here in Springfield to commemorate it. But I could talk about sort of how it looks now in Ocoee, which is a western suburb of Orlando, right?
Right.
Yeah.
If you drive now, you could get to Ocoee from downtown Orlando in about 20 minutes. And it's interesting that you say that they have a walking tour now in Springfield. And of course, being familiar with that part of history, going to university there, it's a very different picture here in Ocoee. And I think that's why this story was so significant to tell and piece together, because for 100 years, the community, the leadership, many of the residents did not acknowledge that this massacre had even occurred. It wasn't until 2018 when the city signed a proclamation just acknowledging that there was what they called an event here in the community. And it wasn't until after our documentary aired that the mayor and city leadership signed a formal letter of apology to the descendants. But you have to read the apology very carefully, because they make it very clear that we don't know who was responsible. When in fact, that's not really the case. We do know who was responsible. Our documentary point out various key figures in the community, including members of law enforcement, high-ranking members, local sheriff, local police chief, who were responsible for sparking the violence that day and the days that followed. And so I don't know why it was carefully worded that day. There's some speculation that it was done for legal reasons, because there are plans to pursue legislation for reparations in this spring legislative session that's coming up here in the state of Florida. And so that could be a reason, I don't know, but it took 100 years for that to happen and 98 years for the community to even acknowledge. And even talking about, a walking tour there in Springfield, when the Equal Justice Initiative, I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, in Alabama was going around the country to acknowledge and to place monuments in communities where there had been lynchings of Blacks and significant stories related. When they wanted to come here to Ocoee to place a marker in the community to acknowledge the lynching of July Perry as it relates to the massacre, the city rejected it. That monument now sits in downtown Orlando. And that happened in the months just prior to the city finally acknowledging that an event, as they called it, occurred in 2018. So there is still a lot of healing that needs to occur. And I think one of the things that has been very interesting to me is that I think it's hard for the local Ocoee residents, particularly the white residents, to get a full comprehension of why people are still talking about this, as they like to say. This happened 100 years ago, but when you think about the fact that the community is just now acknowledging what happened, I think hopefully then you can kind of comprehend why the story is still so palpable and significant today.